Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Eric with Providence MBA, and you've been invited to be a part of this webinar this afternoon on the 5 steps to guarantee HIPAA success within your practice. I'm going to let Liam share a little bit about some of the some of the new things that he's kind of learned about some of the breaches that have recently occurred and then the costs that are going up on that. But really what we want to focus in on today is the positive part about what we can help you with. We don't want to focus too much on the negative, although the negative makes the good look even better. So we want to try to help balance that out perfectly this afternoon. Anyway, we're Providence MBA. We're a medical billing company. We help businesses just like yours and others with the revenue cycle management, but also we really focus on many other aspects of the business, on the medical business advancements. That's where we are today with the HIPAA Success. So hopefully you'll be able to gain some information there, and then maybe share some of this information with others as you go on. Our website is providencemba.com, so if you'll go check us out there, you'll actually find the link to this webinar in a little bit on our website under the tag news. And I actually got to update this here so I can point that out a little bit later, but you'll see it right next to About Us, and you'll see some news there, and you can go forward with that. Again, my name is Eric Auger. I am one of the co-owners here at Providence MBA. My other partner wasn't able to be here this afternoon, but that's okay. I do have another special guest, Liam. Liam, hopefully you're there. Are you there, sir?
Yeah, I'm here, Eric.
Good. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I mean, we've got a lot to try to cover here, so we're going to hop right in there. So I've got a picture of yourself, and again, I appreciate you being able to join us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Compliancy Group, and then we're going to just jump right on in there, and we'll start talking about some of these 5 steps to guarantee HIPAA success.
Yeah, so again, my name is Liam. I'm actually our senior account manager here at Compliancy Group, and really everything that we do as a company is built around the idea of simplifying the compliance processes for small to mid-sized practices, right? So figuring out the most practical, relevant things that we can help you do and accomplish to make your lives a little bit simpler. And we've got a lot of experience in the space because of that. We've been around for about 14 years, work with thousands of users throughout the country in different companies, practices. So I'm just here to lend some input and expertise.
Excellent. Thanks so much, sir. Let's get into the 5 things we're going to cover today. So we're going to take each one of these simultaneously, and we're going to try to keep within 30 minutes, like I promised you, because I know that some of you got to get back to your work there. We're getting this right in the middle of the day, so we want to make sure that you got it all. The first thing we're going to talk about is privacy, thinking about privacy all the time. Where the bulk of our information we're going to be talking about today is this on number 2 right there, where you see conduct 6 mandatory annual risk assessments. We're going to really focus in on what those are, and Liam's going to help us understand what each of those are and how important those annual risk assessments that you do. The third thing we're going to talk about is basically training your staff. Now, the webinars that we're actually doing on a monthly basis could go towards your training, as long as you've got that recorded. And again, I'll let Liam talk a little bit about that. Finally, your annual policies and procedures with your breach notification rules. And then we're going to wrap it up with BAAs, the Business Associates Agreements, for every vendor. So you're going to want to check that out here. So let's get started with the first one, Liam. The first thing is think privacy all the time. I mean, whenever you're working with doctors' offices, I mean, obviously, this is one of the first things we're kind of just working with our doctors all the time. What does it mean to think about privacy all the time?
Well, I think that there's a certain level of, if you want to say, attentiveness, not only to the way that you operate as a practice, but to even the way that your patients perceive the way that you operate, right? So we talk about, like, you could talk about audits and investigations. You see a lot of things that happen in the news where practices get roped into certain things. And the overwhelming majority of the audits that the government conducts on every level, it's not done randomly. It usually happens because somebody made a complaint. If something happened in a practice that made them feel uncomfortable, or that their provider exposed their information in some way, shape, or form. And so the thinking about privacy conversation to me is both about, yes, what can you do in your practice to make sure that you're protecting that information, but also being cognizant of just how your patients are thinking about you. right? And making sure that that's being addressed.
You bet. So it truly is. To me, it's like just the awareness. I mean, obviously, all of us need to be aware of anything that we're doing, even outside of our home or our offices or anything else. We're always thinking about maybe awareness of where we are and even the times and the dates that we're at certain places. But then in your practice, really training and working with your staff of thinking with them and making sure that they're thinking privacy all the time. And we did a webinar, you remember last month, Liam, we did that one on cell phones and the importance of making sure that the privacy with cell phones, whether it's with Facebook or Twitter or any LinkedIn, any of that information could so easily get leaked out between any of those social media aspects. So really, it goes beyond. I was meeting with a group this last week, and we actually talked briefly about them losing an employee. And my first question to them was, when that employee left your office, did you even think about changing passwords? And it was like their eyeballs lit up and went, oh my gosh, we haven't even done that.
Yeah.
So it's this consistency of thinking about privacy all the time. And I know that's part of when we get into these 6 assessments. Now, Liam, we're going to kind of dive in. We're going to take the bulk of the rest of our time here on these 6 annual risk assessments. Why don't you first talk about the importance of that and really talk about, this is not something the compliancy group says 6 mandatory assessments. This is a federal mandate on how that works out with the government. These are the 6 annual assessments that you need to be working on. You want to kind of take over that a little bit real quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So people hear 6 mandatory annual risk assessments, and it can seem like a little bit of a shocking thing. It can sound cumbersome, and if you want to say almost unnecessary or excessive.
Yeah.
But the simple reality of this, the government has set up these assessments to be the baseline or the foundational requirement of HIPAA. Because if you're doing these 6 assessments, and as we get a little bit deeper in here into talking about what each of these things are, you'll be compliant in every aspect of your business, because you'll ultimately be able to then uncover where your gaps are, right? But then also be able to address them. But if you don't even have that knowledge to begin with, it's very difficult to do, because otherwise we're trying to, if you want to say, fly by the seat of our pants, right? And address certain things just as they come up. The government outlines, what they outline as the expectation is much more proactive. So doing these once per year is really the baseline for HIPAA, because it ties in with everything else.
And really, and then we're going to get to it here in a little bit, but that creates that policy and procedure. It's not just a manual that you can say, okay, we've got it right back here and we can pull it off of our shelf, but it really makes this policies, procedures, manuals more of a living document that you're working throughout the entire year. Am I correct on that, sir?
Yeah, exactly. Because the different components of that, so there was an organization, it was actually a small clinic out of Alaska. They had a breach due to a malware incident. And the interesting reason behind why they were fined, it had nothing to do with the fact that they didn't have everything in place that they needed to have. It was that a lot of it was found to be ineffective, right? So they had policies and procedures, but it was kind of like a store-bought HIPAA manual, right? It had not been updated. It had not been customized. They could not prove that they reviewed it with their staff. So all of that comes into play.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people say, we've got HIPAA covered, and I'll kind of dig a little bit, and they say, yeah, we've got this manual over here. And again, it sounds like that clinic that happened there in Alaska. So let's first talk about the first one. The first assessment is this security risk assessment. Why don't you kind of brief us on what the security risk assessment is all about?
Yeah, so the security risk assessment is, if you want to say, the way that these audits are going to break down, okay, it's into 3 categories. So there's assessments that will address the technical components. There's then the physical site audit, and then your administrative audits, which is going to address those policies and procedures. The security risk assessment is the first of those technical audits, and it's designed to be an overview, right, of the overall, what you have in place, whether that's your network, your devices, how everything is protected, right? Making sure that from an IT perspective that you are addressing things in the way that they're supposed to be addressing to protect not just those paper records, right, but the electronic PHI or that
Right.
ePHI that you could
Yeah.
be storing.
Yeah. So anything that has to deal with in your office is we kind of got like a little 4 bullet points there. If you're creating ePHI, you're receiving, you're maintaining it, you're transmitting it. This is what we're talking about here on this first one, the security risk assessment. Number 2, let's just get on over to here, because again, what we're trying to, you can see here, these are to help you identify where your risk, where's your gaps may be, and as we'll talk about them a little bit more, you know, the remediation and what you need to do as you go through this. So number 2, the privacy standard assessment. You know, Liam, I put this here right underneath this little graphic here. When most providers think of HIPAA, this is what they're thinking about, the privacy rule.
Yeah, yeah, and interestingly enough, the privacy rule is both one of the most important. It was actually, so the privacy rule under HIPAA was the first rule that was passed, okay, that really had any teeth to it, okay, after HIPAA had been instituted. Part of that rule was that they want to see that you're doing an assessment on just the way that you operate, right? And that the way that you operate then be reflected into your policies and procedures, that it be clearly in writing what the expectation is in terms of who gets to have access to patient information.
Right.
How does that patient have access to it, right? A lot of that use and disclosure documentation.
Yeah.
We find that out of all of these 6 audits, this is the one that most providers will be most comfortable with,
Right.
because if you want to say it's the most old school of the HIPAA requirements.
Yeah, it's the first thing that we know as patients. That's the first thing that we know about HIPAA. We're the ones that are having to sign it. So, or who's going to get access to our health records. So this is what we're most common with. And Liam, I think this is where you guys kind of come into play, where you go, it's HIPAA. A lot of doctors say that they've got HIPAA and they've got like what they call a light version of HIPAA. They think as long as they got the privacy rule under play, then that's going to protect them from all other things. But you're going to say it's not HIPAA light, it's HIPAA right. So that's what compliancy group talks about here. And so it's the combination of this particular assessment combined with the other 5 that we're talking about here on the 6 mandatory annual assessments here. The most difficult one to kind of start thinking about is this HiTech Subtitle D assessment, because it sounds so technical, but you want to kind of break this down, what this is about?
Yeah, so HiTech Subtitle D is an interesting one. So people think of the HiTech requirements oftentimes as being separate from HIPAA, but things like HiTech, macro-MIPS, certain elements of the Medicare requirements that a lot of practice will be dealing with, it actually all falls under the umbrella of HIPAA. So if you're HIPAA compliant, you'll be addressing all of these things anyway, right? Which actually can save you a lot of time. Now, HiTech Subtitle D is an audit specifically related to the policies, procedures, the things that you have in place right now on how you would respond worst case scenario, right? So if a data breach occurs, if somebody's information gets out there, how is that handled in your practice right now? And is it writing? Is it in writing, right?
Yes.
How is it set up so that you're able to report on it? All of those things connect and impact to the way that you interact with your patient's information if it ever gets breached. And like it says at the bottom there, also applies directly to business associates in the sense that even your vendors are responsible for this.
Yes. Yeah, and it kind of goes into this whole willful neglect too. It's almost like this is where the Office of Civil Rights can actually catch you, because they'll say, yeah, you did your privacy rules, okay, but in this area, you kind of neglected this area. And then also it talks about, this is where the act will require that when patients be notified if there is a breach, and obviously if it's a breach over 500 with 500 patients, then you got HHS involved that have to be notified. So this is all of this combined. And if you're thinking about all of a sudden now, we don't know if we've got this. Again, this is where we might be able to be some assistance to you to kind of help pull all of this stuff together so that you do have not just a manual sitting there in the closet somewhere and going, yeah, we got our stuff done, but you know that you've got everything done. Because again, what I've read here so far, Liam, is that once the Office of Civil Rights starts digging, they don't stop digging until they see that you basically have everything plugged up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Number 4, the security standards assessment. Again, this all kind of seems to blend together a little bit, I believe, Liam. But again, this is addressing some of those HIPAA security rules that, again, that spans across that technical, the physical, and that administrative safeguards.
Well, what's interesting with the security standards assessment is that the way that when we think of security, we think of technology, right? And so the tools and the tech that we deploy to accomplish security, the security standards assessment is a little bit different, okay? 86% of the breaches that happen in the United States at large are not as a result of failing technology. It's usually as a result of failing people, right? Human error accommodates for the overwhelming majority of it, right? And those administrative functions. So the security standards audit, you'll address your technology through those 2 IT assessments. The security standards is more of an administrative function. So like, yes, you could be like Fort Knox and very secure, but how are you addressing this with your people to make sure that on that human side that you're staying secure as well?
Yeah, and so I'm assuming that this assessment is going to be addressing, again, some of those key components as what we're talking about earlier about, did you secure your passwords once an employee left? Am I correct on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It could even be things like password change policies, right? And that making sure that you have in writing what the expectation is in terms of what your people will be doing to keep that information secure beyond just the tech.
Yeah. And so when we say that these things have to be in writing, tell me the importance of that, having this in writing and that you've got this documentation, moving forward.
It's without a doubt the most important aspect of HIPAA, right? So even in what we outline for our clients, right, it's achieving compliance, yes.
Yeah.
But then also being able to illustrate it, because in the event that you have a problem to the government, if you can't prove that you have these things in place, you're not HIPAA compliant at all, right? And so having it in writing is really the only thing ultimately that will protect you from those types of risks. And it also is a very helpful practice as a whole, just to enable that business to run more effectively, right? So having these things in writing, make sure that everybody is reviewing them and being trained. It's an incredibly powerful thing to even just help a practice operate.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Finishing up with the last 2 here on this 6 mandatory assessment risk. Let's talk about real quickly the asset and device assessment. This self-audit will take inventory of all the devices. Now, we kind of went into it a little bit deeper last webinar that we did. We really focused in on smartphones and mobile devices, but again, these devices move in and out of the office. Let's talk about the assessment that needs to be done there.
So believe it or not, this is actually one of the easiest of these 6 audits because it's genuinely as simple as creating a spreadsheet, documenting what devices that you have inside that practice that are accessing PHI and how it's protected, right? Is it encrypted? Is it backed up? And putting that, it's as simple as creating that spreadsheet, putting it in writing. That's a very simple, practical thing that you'd be able to, even for your own peace of mind, know, okay, wow, I have an actual list that tracks all of the devices that could come in contact with patient information. And now that I know that each one of those devices are protected.
You bet. Lastly, let's talk about the physical site. And again, I think a lot of doctors' offices may have done this too, but what is this supposed to look like in this whole documentation?
Yeah, so this is actually doing a physical walk around of your practice, right? So there is even, so through Health and Human Services, you can get something like the physical site audit that'll have you do a physical walkthrough of the entire practice. And it might feel a little bit silly because you're going to be jiggling doorknobs, you're going to be checking locks, you're going to be opening and closing file cabinets and checking off certain things. But it's also a powerful thing, just again, even for your own peace of mind to know that this is being addressed and that now it's in writing, right?
And I would assume also, Liam, this would be, again, in the event that an employee leaves and they may have a set of keys, even though that we may have gotten the keys back from that particular employee, doesn't mean that they may not have made some copies of that. And again, it's what we talked about in the very beginning. Think of privacy at all time and really at all levels of what needs to occur. So if there's keypad changes that need to happen on access to the building, keys to the building, obviously these are those physical site audits that you need to be thinking about as you're going through your physical site audit there. And then what we're finding here, Liam, I think what's a lot of people thinking, gosh, I'm failing in so many areas. But this is part of the assessment, is to find out where those gaps are and then what you need to do with remediation. That's the whole point of the audit. Am I correct?
Absolutely. So
it's
first
nothing
time
to be afraid of, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, first time going around some of these things, you're going to have a whole lot of no's.
Yes.
And that could be a little bit frustrating, right? Like, no, I don't have this in place. No, we're not doing this. But then it's almost liberating when you're able to do that, because you now have a very clear action plan in terms of what you actually need to get done. Right?
Correct. Yeah, you bet. All right, so folks, we've got about 9 minutes left here, and I think we're doing pretty well on our time. So again, if there's any particular questions as we kind of start wrapping up here, feel free to ask Liam or myself, and then we'll see what we can do to address those. The third step, again, on the 5 steps to guarantee HIPAA success within your practice, is training your staff. Liam, I've talked to a lot of doctors and actually have talked to some office managers, and they said, you know what, I think we train once a year. Is training your staff once a year okay?
So the answer in its most basic form sometimes will be yes, but that's only true if you have zero turnaround in terms of the employees that come in and out of that practice, right? Because the annual training requirements of HIPAA are that, so there's very specific trainings. So it's HIPAA 101, there's incident management, right? So that every employee knows how to respond in the event that something goes wrong. Cybersecurity, right? Which then ties in, again, that human element. Yes, we have technology in place to secure ourselves, but what can we do as people and employees to protect that data as well? And then sometimes fraud, waste, and abuse. If you're dealing with Medicare, kind of the +1 under what the HIPAA trainings would be that fraud, waste, and abuse training. And the thing with these trainings, in addition to that, the government actually wants to see that you're reviewing your policies and procedures with your staff, right? Because everything that we just talked about putting those policies in writing, yes, it's great if you have those policies. Doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot, though, if you're not reviewing it with the people that matter most, which is your employees.
Your employees, yeah.
And so all of that comes into play for the sake of training the staff.
And that could be something as simple as, having one of us do a demo for your staff, or go through some specific training as we're going through it. So, once you get engaged with us, there's some things that we can actually help you with topics or again, your policies, procedures, what they need to do, training that staff. Liam, whenever some of the organizations that you work with, because you guys work with hospitals and doctors' offices, eye clinics, dentists, when you kind of got all those across the board, when you guys are working with them, what do you find the best practice in training? Do you see that they're doing it once a month? Do you see that they're doing it every other month, twice a year, on a quarter? What do you see the best practice become?
So as soon as you onboard a new employee, that new employee must be trained. Right. So actually that same clinic in Alaska, if we're talking about like effective compliance, they had training, right? They had a very reputable third-party training company that came on site once per year. The problem is that they had a 30% turnover, right? So the newest people in that practice, the ones that probably needed to be trained the most, were having to wait and were not receiving any training until that annual training period came around.
Gotcha.
This is something, so formalized training must be done at minimum when you hire that employee, and then at least once per year after that. But then again, it's just human nature. You can have those formalized trainings in terms of what needs to be documented for the sake of the government, right? But this has to be still a continual part of your conversations with those staff members throughout the year. Because again, like we said at the beginning, privacy is paramount, right? So this has to be in everybody's mind throughout the year, and not just a one-a-year type of thing where somebody sits down and signs off on a piece of paper that they were trained. That's much less powerful.
Yeah, if you put it into practice, I would say having something talked about in your staff meetings once a month, kind of reviewing, different things. Because again, things change throughout the year. Like Liam said, you got different employees that come in and out. And again, that's what's going to be the best. And it's going to be based upon your policies, procedures with your brief notification rules. And I think we've kind of got a good gist about what policies and procedures are, Liam, but let's really, with the rest of this time that we have, talk about the breach notification rules and the importance of knowing when to report something.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, right, there's lots of different layers to this. So there's something called the whistleblower law under HIPAA,
Right.
which simply states your staff has to be able to notify you of a breach without feeling any repercussions taken against them, right?
Right.
So if that's them doing it anonymously, which is the best way, you should set up some methodology within that practice where your employees can tell you about a situation that happened without feeling uncomfortable about it, okay? Once that happens, your responsibility, okay, is to investigate what occurred. And with that investigation comes determining if this is a reportable breach.
Right.
And to put this into perspective, first of all, it's a matter of identifying, okay, how many patient records were compromised, okay? Because if it's less than 500, it does need to be notified to the government by the end of the calendar year.
Right.
And you also have to notify the patients that were compromised. If we're talking about a big scale breach and it's more than 500 patients, it's not at the end of the calendar year, it's actually within 60 days.
Right.
You have to notify the government, the patient, and also the local media, okay, is what's required. So like you have to call, if you want to say, your local newspaper and let them know, hey, this happened. We need you to put a story out there, which is a little bit
scary.
It's just a little bit bizarre. Yeah. But the interesting thing is that if you can conduct that type of an investigation and do it right, okay, if you're HIPAA compliant in other aspects, you might find that what you thought was a breach is not actually a breach. And so
Right.
you might have an employee that lost a smartphone, okay, that had patient information on it. But if you were doing that security audit, right, your security risk analysis and that assessment, you would have the right safeguards in place on that phone. It would be encrypted. It would be backed up. You would have your asset and device audit where that's clearly in your log showing, hey, we have this device. This is how it's protected. And that's not actually a reportable breach then because that data was encrypted and you can get it back, right? So there's lots of different layers to this. Most important thing, right, if you determine that it's a breach, it has to be reported. Okay, it's just a matter of determining how soon it needs to be reported, how many patient records were compromised, and taking care of it accordingly.
Yeah, and that's so important. Lastly, step 5, maintaining a BAA for every vendor. Liam, I've got a couple of quick questions for that, and then we're going to need to try to start wrapping up for this. But a lot of people think for what is considered to be a vendor. Is my guy that comes in and works on our AC a vendor? Is it the telephone guy? Do we need to have a BAA, or is it just people that have access to the EPHI? And again, because we know that some of these maintenance people actually come back behind where the doctor's office is actually doing their work.
Yes, certainly. So there's two differentiators to this conversation. So first is those business associate agreements, okay? And a business associate is somebody specifically that is providing a business service to you.
Right.
That requires that they come in contact with that information. Okay, so this could be their IT firm, right? Their hosting service. It could be their biller, right? And their whoever handles their revenue cycle management. Somebody like yourself, Eric. It could be any of those different types of vendors. Sometimes a lawyer or their accountant that you would need a BAA with.
Right.
Somebody like their maintenance man, right, or their cleaning lady.
Right.
Not necessarily a business associate, because their job does not require them to handle that information, but they could see something that they're not supposed to, right? And so for somebody like that, you would just need something as simple as a confidentiality agreement which would then satisfy those requirements. They're not a full-blown business associate, though, if you want to call it that.
That's good.
It's still very important to have those in place.
That's good information, because again, a lot of doctors, hopefully we brought some awareness to thinking of HIPAA all the time. So we've talked about door locks and email passwords or passwords. We've talked about, business associates agreements, confidentialities with your maintenance crew. So some of these things, a lot of times we just let that kind of slip our mind here. So, we've kind of gone through all of this, and it's really based upon this checklist, or what we call this complimentary HIPAA assessment that we would like to work with you on. So if you would like to get a copy of this, you'd like for us to kind of work with you on this, you can contact either myself or Liam. We would love to be able to kind of work with this. Basically, Liam, we've got this checklist here, which is something from you guys from Compliancy Group, but this is also not something that you guys have created. This is based upon, again, what the federal government has come up with.
Yep, it's entirely based on what Health and Human Services calls the 7 elements of an effective compliance program. And
right.
So even using something as simple as this checklist, this is not, if you want to say, this is not those 6 audits, right? But it'll give you a very quick idea of where you're at from a compliance perspective to then know whether or not you need to go deeper into this.
You bet. Liam, I want to tell you, thank you for joining me this afternoon, and we're going to kind of start winding down and talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing next on our next webinar. So again, Liam, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
It's absolutely my pleasure, Eric. Thank you as always for having me.
You bet. Thanks so much. Folks, for those that are on the webinar still and those that listen on, we try to do an educational webinar every month to give you just information that you're going to need to know, whether it's HIPAA, whether it is working with your staff, whether it's, we've got actually one coming up here soon after this one, the 5 steps or the 5-star requirements to be that rock star office manager. However, what's coming up here in the fall, or guess what, more diagnosis codes. So we thought that we would get you prepared in what's coming down the pipe on some new diagnosis codes for you in your office. So if you are ready for more codes, well, guess what? Here they come. So September the 19th, mark it down on your calendar. I'm going to be sending out some information, again, through our channels, our LinkedIn channel, our Facebook channel, everything that we have here on getting ready for more diagnosis codes that are coming along. So mark your calendar for September the 19th. That is a Thursday. It's our 3rd Thursday of the month. And here's our link there for that particular one. Now, nobody's going to remember zoom.us/J611. Nobody's going to remember that. But it will be on the recording, and it will be on a link coming soon. Folks, again, let me kind of wrap up here again just to tell you thank you for joining us this afternoon. Hopefully, you've gotten some information. For some of you, you may not be in an office. You may know a doctor. You go, gosh, I never even thought about some of this stuff. Would you please pass this information on? We will have this on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days, and everybody that's on here will actually get a link to that, and so you can share that later on. If you've got any questions about HIPAA compliancy, or you've got any questions about your revenue cycle management, your actual medical billing, again, we're here to help you. With the codes that we're going to be talking about next month, we're here to even help with coding auditing. So if you've got some problems with codes, you don't know if you're using the right codes for your business, we'll be more than happy to help you out. Again, let me kind of wrap this up. My name is Eric Auger, and again, it's been my privilege to host this webinar this afternoon. Hopefully you've gotten a lot out of it. I do once again thank Liam and Compliancy Group partnering with us on this today, and I appreciate your time. More importantly, you taking out your 30, 35 minutes here this afternoon to join us this afternoon. Again, it's my pleasure. I look forward to talking with you. Give me a call here at 817-771-4000. I look forward to hearing from you very soon. Everybody have a great weekend that's got coming up. Hopefully you'll be able to spend some time with your family, your friends, and enjoy a very safe weekend coming up. Everybody have a good one. Thank you so much. Goodbye.